their Ongwehoe traditions that some of our traditions that were left on the path. And unfortunately, this 300-year gap in acknowledging our ancient agreements with the settlers is a result of the multi-generational effects of residential schools, cultural genocide that has happened. It is through learning and understanding that we can create change and envision new opportunities and experience personal growth in our current state, to encourage the 7th generation of youth to rekindle the fires of our nations. This event series seeks to breathe the life into current Indigenous relationships at the School of Continuing Studies, and so that those embers, will carry on to other nations in our relationship building with the original peoples of this land, Daneto. But I'd like to introduce Dr. Beverley Jacobs right at the moment. She's been fortunate we've been extremely fortunate to have her come and speak. And I won't do her full biography because it's rather extensive, but I think it's really important to share how she was recently appointed senior advisor to the president on Indigenous relations and outreach at the University of Windsor. Dr. Beverley Jacobs is also an associate professor in the Faculty of Law at the University of Windsor and practices part-time in her home community of Oswego, or Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. And her research focuses on Indigenous legal orders, Indigenous holistic health, Indigenous research methodologies, and decolonization of Eurocentric law. She obtained her Bachelor of Law degree from the University of Windsor in '94, a Master's of Law degree from the University of Saskatchewan in 2000, and finally her PhD from the University of Calgary in 2018. And she was also, Dr. Jacobs was also a former president of the Native Women's Association of Canada, elected from 2004 to 2009. And also a consultant, researcher, writer, public speaker. And her work centers around ending gendered control or gendered colonial violence against Indigenous people and restoring Indigenous laws, beliefs, values, and traditions. So it gives me great pleasure to have Dr. Beverley Jacobs share her presentations with us, and I won't take up further most of her time, and I'll let Beverley speak right now. Thank you.
Nyawa George for that introduction. Thank you for inviting me here today. Just going to introduce myself in the language that I know, which is actually the Cayuga language, because my dad spoke Cayuga. Scano, Sokwego, Giaso, Gowenkuse, Ganyangehaga, Nyagwait, Shoutda, Haudenosaunee. So greetings of peace to all of you. I'm from the Mohawk Nation, Bear Clan, and I told you my real name. And my real name is Gowenkuse, which means she's visiting. And also told you that I live at Six Nations, Grand River Territory. So thank you again for the invitation here today. My journey, I want to talk about my journey actually from I think the impacts of the residential school. I am an intergenerational survivor. My grandmother was in the Mohawk Institute in Brantford, which is on Haudenosaunee Six Nations lands. And one of the oldest schools that was set in place even before Canada was Canada. It was established in 1831 and ended in 1971. So 140 years of colonial violence against our people and genocide. So I can talk about this on a very personal level. Also in the research that I've done and the understanding even of who I am and where I come from, and the relationships that I've known in my lifetime to understand what's happened, to understand what's happened to me, to my family, to my nation, is on such a huge scale. And then being able to now have this conversation with you in a as much as a healthy way as I can, to educate, because now I feel that it's important that everyone is aware of not only our history, because it's never been taught properly, but also the truth. And sometimes the truth hurts, and which is part of the problem when we're talking about these issues and the impacts on our people, on our Mohawk people, that you know, the root of it comes from colonial law. So I do have a PowerPoint, and I'm gonna share my screen with you, and it's only visuals. So it's just to help. It helps me as I'm speaking. It's also a way to, you don't have to focus on me so much, but to focus on the message that I'm wanting to deliver today. So as George had mentioned, I wear many hats, and I am very closely connected to my community, to many communities, I should say, not only at Six Nations, but you know, all of our Haudenosaunee communities. I participate in ceremony. I don't always say this, and I don't always do, just because of my responsibilities right now, but I am a faith keeper at the Lower Cayuga Longhouse. And the reason why I hesitate is because I'm not doing my job there. Because I'm doing this work, I made a decision to be in an institution. And so the life as a faith keeper, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be focused in my community and working on a daily basis in my community, to do the job as a faith keeper. So I've made a conscious choice of where to situate myself, and when I am able to be in community in the Longhouse specifically, I do that, and actually really try hard to balance everything. And sometimes it's really difficult to balance all of that, and not only with the work that needs to be done here, but also, you know, at home with my family. I'm a grandmother. I have many kids that live at my home, that love my home, and they stay at my home. And, you know, that's part of my job too, is to make sure that I have a safe space for everyone in my home. And so I have lots of kids that come in and out, and so that's my task as well. So I have many, like I said, many hats, not only professionally, but at home and where I come from. So I just wanted to share that with you, and how much of a balancing act it is on a daily basis to do this work, and now to you know, to support the people that I love. And being here in the community of Akwesasne is where I am right now, and with my my sister who's had a major loss, and I can totally relate to that. So so I just wanted to start with the quote from the apology from Harper, and I want to go from there. So as you know, the apology from Harper, when he said that the government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of Aboriginal peoples of the country for failing them so profoundly. And we are sorry. So I want to tell you a story about this, because my journey to that day in July 2008 was a major journey, to be sitting in the House of Commons and listening to the apology and responding to it. And if you listen to my words in the apology, I never accepted it. I said, thank you. Thank you for the apology, but I never accepted it. And the reason why I didn't accept it is because I had asked some of the survivors that I had worked with at the time at Six Nations. And I said, what does this apology mean to you? And I would say the majority of the responses I got was, well, nothing really. It's just a bunch of words. And if they had meant what they're saying, there would be action. There would be real action to repair the harm that Canada and Britain have done to our people. And so I took that to heart from what they had said to me. And I didn't even know, really, I didn't know I was going to be responding to the apology until probably a week before. So preparing for that, like I said, was a journey, because I had already done my own work for myself as an intergenerational survivor to sort through what happened to my grandmother and all of her siblings, where I knew firsthand the impacts that it had on their lives and their families' lives. So my mother and all of her siblings, and what it did to them, and then what it did to me, and then what it did to my daughter. So, and then what it did to my grandchildren. So already at the time of responding was already 5 generations already, just thinking about the impacts that it had very specifically. I didn't realize at the time that that there was going to be millions of people watching the apology. I didn't realize walking into the House of Commons that because I had a job to do. I had a task to respond. I had a task on responsibility of the Native Women's Association of Canada, a response from my own people, from survivors, from my family, from my grandmother, from everyone that I was thinking about. So as I walked in and realizing at the time that I needed to have a strong voice. So what had happened before walking in was there was lots of media. There was lots of media interviews. There was, and I didn't know we didn't know the apology, what was going to be said 15 minutes before walking in. So we go into Stephen Harper's Prime Minister's office, and he hands us a paper copy of the apology and says, this is what I'm going to say. And you can't keep this. You can't keep it, but this is what I'm going to say. So in response and preparing for that, I had already had an idea of what he wasn't going to say. And that he probably wouldn't have said anything about the impacts upon our women, or impacts upon our land, or impacts upon our communities, and where we're at the moment in that relationship, which wasn't good. So I had prepared for that. But all the time, in any presentations, anything I do, I always ask for help. I ask for help for my voice, what needs to be said. And I had to really prepare emotionally, physically, spiritually. And it was really difficult. So, because it was so personal. So what had happened was, in preparing we had a ceremony in the morning with the young people, with youth, and that was almost like a healing ceremony to prepare for it. And there was also, like I said, media interviews. So I had just finished a media interview that morning, and everything was fine. Everything was, I thought was okay. And we were going through the questions, and it was okay, like I said, until the reporter says to me, "So how has this impacted you personally?" And I remember at the time, still emotional. I remember at the time, you know, thinking about my life and my grandmother's life, my mother's life, everything that they had to endure, and the violence that they had to endure as a result. And I couldn't answer the question because I was crying so hard. And it was one of those really deep emotional cries where I had no control over it. And I had many of those before that, and many times, in different places and different public spaces. But this one was different. And so I had them stop. They stopped recording. I said, I need a bit of time to recover and reclaim my strength. And so I took I've always carried tobacco with me, part of our tradition. And so I was asking my mother and my grandmother, who were both gone. And I said, I need you to help me, because I don't want to be just crying throughout my whole response. I need you to give me that strength to be able to say what needs to be said. So that's what happened. And so carrying that, and I had been gifted that eagle feather. And the eagle feather was gifted to me by the Muskego family from Saskatchewan. And the Muskego family had lost their daughter. She was murdered in Saskatchewan. They didn't know at the time she was still missing when they had gifted it to me. And she was still missing when the apology occurred, and it was only 2 months later when her burned body was found. And throughout that whole time, you know, I had been on a journey with them from the time that they had lost her, which was in 2004. And it was just after the Stolen Sisters report and amnesties, the work that I did with the Stolen Sisters and meeting with families across the country. And when they had gifted that to me, they asked me to use it whenever I needed to. So I've always taken those kinds of things very respectfully, and you know, they had asked me, many of the families had asked me to carry their voice for them because they felt that they never had a voice, because for such a long time they had been out on the front lines and doing the work that they're doing and nobody was listening. And they were doing work even in the community and nobody was listening. So so I took that to heart and I carried that with me, and made sure that that voice was heard, trying very hard all the time. And so carrying those things helped my spirit, helped me to say what needed to be said. And basically what I said in the apology was, the response to the apology is about the respect for our women. Because even as part of who I am and Haudenosaunee law, and the femininity of our laws and the relationships that we have with all of creation, that's the source. And our mother earth, and every female living thing that brings life is our responsibility back to them, and the respect back to them.
Yeah.
And that there has to be that's like one of the main responsibilities that we have. And that talking about the responsibility that government has. So like I said, I didn't accept their apology. I thanked them for their apology, but then I said, so what are you going to do? And that, remembering what the survivors had said to me, is about the actions. And I said, so what are you going to do about it? What are you going to actually do to repair the harm that's been done to our people? And at that time also is the 2008, there was also the issues of, even at that time, about land reclamations, about land back. So everything always came back full circle. And also at the time, in April of 2008, my own cousin's body was found murdered in the community. So that was only 2 months after we had buried her, in this response to the apology. So like I said, that emotional piece that I had to maintain in order to say the words that needed to be said. And now, having to go through all of that, this was probably around the same time on Parliament Hill, with families, with mothers, mothers of their daughters who were also missing or murdered. So my relationship with them has been really powerful. And the roles that we have in remembering and honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and it's all connected. This is all about the genocide of our people. This is all about the targets of genocide, specifically against our women. So you target our women, you kill our women, you kill for further generations. The generation stops at killing of our women. And so that's why there's such a demand for action. that something deeper needs to happen. And how, again, like I said, this is all connected, and the root of this is based on the doctrine of discovery. The root of this is the erasure of us as Indigenous people on our lands and our territories. When the colonizers came here initially, they thought the land was open for settling, open for discovery. But we as Indigenous people have always been connected to our lands and our territory. So how can they claim something that has already been? We were already here. We weren't discovered. And it's about the violence. You can imagine the millions of Indigenous people who were murdered at that time and continue to be murdered in the name of claiming land and territory. So we're still in it. We're still in that colonial genocidal policies. We're still in the way as Indigenous people because we continue to protect our lands and our people and our territories and our children for future generations. Right? So this also is about the violence. It's about our bodies, not only as Indigenous women, but all of us as Indigenous people. We're not terra nullius. You cannot consider our bodies to be empty to claim. You cannot consider our lands and our territories as empty to claim. So that, again, like I said, this is all connected back to who we are as a people. So in this journey that that I have been on, I would say my whole lifetime since birth, to understand what's happened to our people, and coming to this point today, is reclaiming who we are, reclaiming and revitalizing and strengthening and understanding the violence that's occurred, the impacts that it has on our relationships to each other as human beings, but also our relationships to all of the natural world, and that we have that responsibility. So after the apology in 2008, there was also a lot of rhetoric, or maybe I'm going to be blunt and say bullshit, from the federal governments, by Harper. So when he said, there needs to be action, and I think things are worse now than they've ever been, because we're dealing with people who, politicians, I'm talking specifically about government. I learned a lot. I was never involved in politics before becoming involved in the Native Women's Association of Canada. So I learned really fast about politics and how they work. And, it's about votes, it's about money, it's about what they can do in the 2 to 3 years that they're in an elected position. And they don't care. They don't care about us. They don't care about Indigenous people. They have no knowledge about who we are as Indigenous people. None. That was one of the things that I really learned in the position that I held in meeting with government, meeting with members of parliament. They have no knowledge about our history, about who we are as a people, about the history of colonization, about the residential school system, about the impacts, about the truth of treaty relationship, about the truth of the land. And that was a major eye-opener for me about what their focus is, and it's not Indigenous people. And so we're still in the way of development. So we continue to fight a system that doesn't care. And so I made a conscious decision at that time that they're not going to be my focus anymore. They're not my focus anymore. The focus is my people, my children, my grandchildren, my family, nationhood, strengthening of who we are. So that became and has become my focus, and educating. Everywhere I go, no matter who it is, where I end up, I'm always having to educate, always having to talk about the reality, the truths. And one of the things also that I learned about that is speaking truth and not being afraid to. Because that's one of the things that colonization has done to our people, is that it's silenced us, and that it's made us feel like our voices aren't worthy. That's what happens when you become a victim of violence. So we've been in an abusive relationship with Canada and governments for hundreds of years. So when you reclaim your voice, when you reclaim your identity, when you reclaim that's not going to happen anymore, then you know that what you're saying is the truth. And so I made that conscious decision of doing whatever I could. I always have anyway. And so my journey has brought me now to full circle. So when I started law school in 1991, my dad was really worried. You know, I was raised, like I said, I was raised very traditionally in our longhouse. And he was really worried about where I was headed in learning about colonial law. He thought he lost me. But I had reminded him before he passed how much he taught me, and how much my family has taught me about my responsibility, about being Ongwahowe, about you know, I told him that he was so strict about it that I've never forgotten and never will. And so he was happy with that. I remember seeing the smile on his face as I said that. And my uncle, who was one of our traditional chiefs, he too was there at the time. And when I graduated from law school, he said to me, okay, now it's time to learn your own law. And that's when he started asking me to come to probably everything that he had participated in. A lot of it was our condolence ceremonies and learning about our condolence. And, you know, he'd take me to all the practices and what they were teaching, what they were learning. And so that's become a really, really major piece of my identity and connection. And the reminder, like I said, coming back full circle. So then focusing on Haudenosaunee law, on Indigenous legal orders, on ensuring that we never lose that. I thought, government, sorry, but you're not any help anymore. And you're making things worse. Things are worse now than ever, like I said. So it's leading me into many different spaces again. So now, as you know, with the Kamloops discovery of the 215 children from the residential school who were buried, you know, I know people have talked about this, but every school having a grave site. Schools having, residential schools having grave sites. Like, you think about that. The genocide is right in front of us. So it's up to, I can't remember the numbers now, but internationally, both Canada and US, with the numbers in the thousands now. So I was asked to work with our survivors at Six Nations, Grand River Territory. They started, well, they have been, actually, I had been working with them when I graduated from law school in the 90s. They had already started then, so 30 years ago, they had already known the work that they were going to do to bring attention to the issues and what needs to be done. So after the Kamloops discovery, they had wanted a criminal investigation into the deaths, the murders, and the missing children from the Mohawk Institute. So there is a website now. It's called survivorsecretariat.ca. So that's where this visual is from. And there were actually right now, I think it's over 30, either 32 or 33 First Nations communities that were forced to send their children to the Mohawk Institute. Anishinaabe, Cree, Mohawk, from all kinds of different nations that were forced to send their children to the Mohawk Institute. And so now there is an investigation, a criminal investigation that's occurring as we speak. And they had asked me to work with them as the Indigenous human rights monitor. And so my role with this criminal investigation is to actually monitor the work of the police task force. So the police task force includes the Six Nations Police, the Brantford Police, and the Ontario Provincial Police. So if you can imagine, policing and Indigenous people historically has not been good either. So there has been some difficulties in this work, in working with Ontario Provincial Police. The training that has to be done, trying to keep it trauma informed, culturally safe, doing the training, making sure that the rights of the survivors are respected, making sure that that they're doing this properly in a culturally specific way to ensure that they're not re-traumatized. And it's really difficult. It's a difficult position in doing this work, because it's hearing their stories again. They have to tell, part of it is the evidence and having to tell their story again about what happened. But the focus is on the deaths and the murders of children. So we're right in the midst of it, and the investigation continues. Right now, we're doing the ground penetrating radar on the lands, and there's over 500 acres of the lands. So it's going to take years. It's going to take years to go through all of the land and the territory surrounding the Mohawk Institute. And the survivors are directly, they're the boss. They're my boss. They're the ones who are leading this. And if you can imagine, the powerful, empowering position that they're in now to make the decisions and to ensure from their lived experiences. They were the ones who were directly impacted. So now they're the ones who are making the decisions about what needs to be done. And so, they're on the ground. They created a board, the Survivors Secretariat Board. So it's pretty, what I've seen so far from, like I said, from my journey, listening to my uncles, my grandmother's brothers, who told me some horrific stories about what happened to them in the school. And on a daily basis, now in the review that I do is listening to their stories. It's very similar work in meeting with families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, because it isn't just the story of their loved one. It's about the history, their lives, the impacts. But one of the things that I take from this is how resilient, how powerful our people are. Even listening to the survivors who have been in horrific violence that occurred to them, to now to be able to stand up, and even in public, they're doing media interviews. They're doing the frontline presentations, and being able to speak up now about what needs to be done. So I'm just so honored to be on this journey with them now. And I always, thinking about my grandmother and all of her siblings who are gone now. And even all of my mom's family, they're all gone now. And taking on that responsibility that I have now to my children and my grandchildren, and to maintain the strength that we have, and to continue on for our future. So that's really, really important to me, and important to our families. But the struggle continues despite everything, and our relationship to our land and our territory. And like I said, this is all directly connected. So this is a visual, it's an artwork by the late Brad Bonaparte. He's from this community in Akwesasne, and he was an iron worker, artist. And so this is actually part of my PhD dissertation, in looking at the impacts of resource development on holistic health. And I was here in the community of Akwesasne, and was a powerful journey also with the the Kanyangihaga people here in Akwesasne, in meeting with knowledge holders, with community members, with the youth, and asking them what makes them healthy, the impacts of resource development along the St. Lawrence, which is our traditional territory, and where we're at, where we need to go. So I thought this was I had to look for this piece of art, because actually Gudgie Cook, who is one of the Mohawk, she's a midwife, but she's a scientist also here in the community, and she had told me about this piece of art because it reflects the losses, the impacts on our women, and the impacts even on the natural world, and you know, those that carry life, not just the women, but the animals, the water animals that are now dead, and the impacts that he had here specifically in the community along the river. And so when I went looking for this, I found that it was on the cover of the Joint Commission, International Joint Commission. They do the work on the Great Lakes. And he had presented this to them back in 1989, I think it was. And so that's how long also that this has been identified as a real issue. So, so you can see, you know, there's the water, the fish, the water animals, the birds, the women, the babies that are impacted. There was a study done here in Akwesasne on mother's breast milk, and there was PCBs in the mother's breast milk. And so that's when they told the women that they couldn't eat the fish anymore. And that's where, you know, that's our sustenance. That's part of what makes us healthy, is our relationship to the land, to the animals, to the water. That's what the Thanksgiving address tells us, is our relationship to them. So it has an impact on our babies. Another term that Gudji Cook also identified is that women are the first environment. So when we carry our babies and water in that life that's being formed, so women being the first environment is part of that acknowledgement of our relationship to not only the water, the land, creator. That direct connection that we have is acknowledged in our ceremonies. It's acknowledged, it's coming up in our seed ceremonies that acknowledge in our songs about that relationship. So you can see that the targeting of our babies have been ongoing since colonization. So the residential school system was part of that history. This has been ongoing since colonization, and it hasn't ended because we're still dealing with the crisis of our babies being found in Mother Earth, of our women being found in Mother Earth. This is the reality of that. So I wanted to share this because it's a powerful visual about the reality of where we're at today, and with respect to the lands and the territories and our women and our babies, and just understanding that. So this is a quote from my dissertation. I'm just going to read it. The relationship of Indigenous peoples to their lands and the environment is a concept that is universally understood amongst Indigenous peoples around the world. It is a spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical relationship among human beings and their surroundings. The spiritual connections to our Mother, the Earth, are maintained through ceremonies and acknowledgements of Thanksgiving. It is that spiritual connection that as human beings, we are no different than a tree, a plant, an animal, or any other living spiritual being. There is a common interest in that what happens to you and what happens to the earth happens to us as well. and that the first peace comes with your Mother Earth. So that, again, is part of that identification of our relationship. And the last part, the only difference is that the Creator gave human beings a mind to think, a mind to make decisions for the benefit of future generations. So to me, that's where we're at. We're right in the midst. We're right in the midst of a prophecy. Actually, we've been told prophecy also from time immemorial that we have to make a choice. And we all know what's happening in creation right now with all of the climate change, with all of the natural disasters that are occurring around the world. You know, I've been told many stories about our prophecies and the reality of where we're at. So knowing that we're right in the midst of it, and also knowing the end story, that we have a choice as human beings. We have to make that decision right now as we speak. As human beings, we're a humanity. Doesn't matter what color we are, we're all human. So that we have a responsibility to our mother. If it wasn't for her and everything that comes with her, none of us would be here as human beings. That's our teachings. So we have to make that difference. And these are the messages that come to me as a result of what's happened historically to our babies. This is the messaging that comes from the spirits of our children. Because this is a long history, right? Here in Haudenosaunee territory is 500 years at least of this colonial imposition. So there's a lot of our ancestors who remind us on a daily basis what our responsibilities are, and they keep telling us we have to do something fast. That's our prophecy. So when you've asked me to do this presentation today and thinking about post-apology, right? The post-apology is our relationship to our mother. So we've been fighting as Indigenous people. We've been fighting. We've been in an undeclared war with Canada, with the US since colonization. So we're fighting for our lands and our territories, but we're not fighting for ourselves either. We're fighting for all humanity. We're fighting for your lives. Because when we're fighting for our land back and to protect our lands and our territories, it's for all of humanity. When we have our ceremonies, when we do in our Thanksgiving, all of our ceremonies are about Thanksgiving and that reciprocal relationship to give thanks to them. We're not just doing that for us. We're doing that for all people. And so part of this is understanding that. So that when you see us fighting on the front lines, when you see our young people who are standing up, who are now have a voice and now want to make sure that everyone knows they have a voice. So that's our law. Haudenosaunee law tells us that we have people to protect our lands and our territories. So they are following Haudenosaunee law. When they're protecting our lands and our territories, they're doing it for future generations. They've heard enough. They've seen enough. And I've seen this in the last, this generation of young people who are now standing up and have a voice and are not worried about the consequences from colonial law. Because now they have supporters. Because I support them 100%, 110%. I'll support them in court. I'll support them as their lawyer. I'll support them on the front lines because they're doing their duty. So this is the importance of why we also need you as allies to support, because like I said, we're doing this for everybody. It's part of the prophecy. It's part of our responsibility. It's part of the actions that need to occur. So I just want to end there, because to me, that's also the most important messaging that I'm receiving from our families who have been lost, our babies who have been lost, to protect for future generations. So I'm going to end there and just leave it as, you know, part of our responsibility is that we're all of us are responsible for this. And just want to thank you, Senyawa, for the opportunity to speak and leaving some time for questions or any clarification or any comments that you might have. So Nyawa, thank you.
Thank you so much, Beverly. We cannot thank you enough on behalf of the School of Continuing Studies, but I'm sure everyone here also today for your amazing presentation, sharing your invaluable knowledge and your experiences with us. We would like to do a quick period of questions for anyone who has questions for Beverly. Feel free to either unmute yourself and ask the questions, raise up your hand with the emojis, or write them in the chats. We have some people keeping an eye on there. So if you want to ask the questions, we're going to start now. So feel free to participate. We'd love to hear from you.
If I could just say something really quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to, you know, again, I won't take up too much time, but I just wanted to share too that I remember when that apology happened in 2008, we were actually, me and my young family were just coming back from ceremonies actually when we went to the Native Resource Center and in the city that we're living in. And it was like, I too broke down. I broke down, you know, because we were, you know, trying to make that a part of our children's lives, and through ceremony and acknowledgement, and it was really powerful to, and I did thank you for the background and the context of how that and your own personal experience that means so much to me, and something that I will, you know, carry, you know, for the rest of my days anyways in this earth walk. But anyways, Yoko, you know, I went for sharing what you did. Thank you.
Yeah, George.
Yo.
Thank you so much, George, for sharing that. I believe our first question has just come in for Beverly. I can read it for everyone. So Kaliyuri has asked, as a Black person, what are ways do you think Black liberation movements to build solidarity are similar related with Indigenous folks?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's really, really important to have solidarity, because we know that the rights of Black people and the history are very similar, and that we really need to come together. It's a good question, because it's also the same work that I'm doing even at the university. So one of the, there's been some major racism, the racism against Black people, the Black Lives Matter, even institutionally, right? The things that are happening institutionally. So we're really coming together to work on partnering in whatever we can, the messaging about the solidarity that we need to do. And it's totally needed.
Thank you, Beverly. We have many other people in the chat saying thank you also. Samantha just wrote, she is very happy that you were sharing with us. She's also Mohawk from Akwesasne and Bear Clan as well. Very interested in politics. So this was a great presentation.
So she's my sister then.
Oh, yeah. So let us know if anyone else, if you want to write your questions in the chat or just unmute yourself, feel free to do so as well. We love to hear your voices too.
I'm also looking at the chat, so just want to thank you for listening and for your acknowledgements.
Yeah, I just
A
wanted
lot.
to make a more of a comment than anything. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. I always like you introduce myself in my original language. I always say Sigoli Swagwag Galahindi Neo gets Wagisli Wagi Niwakadaloda Onyada Ungwehiwane. So my name is Galahindi, translates the clouds passing over in the colonial language, and I'm a member of the people of the Standing Stone First Nations of the Thames here in Turtle Island. So I'm watching from the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, Huron, and Delaware nations. And I want to first of all just say Yanko for your talk, because I believe I do a stream called Everything Indigenous online, where I share content related to Indigenous cultures of North America. And I always say in every chat or stream that I do is that we really build a much more harmonious society if we can, first of all, recognize our differences, acknowledge those differences and respect them. So we do this by asking questions. So if there's a group of people we don't know something about, we need to ask questions about them, get to know them. And that way we can really build some mutual understanding, compassion, and empathy for each other. And that creates a mutual respect. And I think that comes across in all of these conversations and talks that I hear elders come out and do. And that's come across in your conversation today. And I really appreciate that message continues to be pushed. It really comes down to mutual respect and understanding and compassion for each other. And again, I appreciate you doing this talk today. Yanko.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a question by Carmen. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Antoine. It's not a question, but it's more of a comment. Dr. Jacobs, Beverley, thank you so much for this the presentation and sharing your story. I was one of those millions of people that watched and glued to my television 14 years ago to that apology. And I do remember you standing there. I didn't know you at that time, but your photo, as soon as you showed your photo on the PowerPoint, and oh yes, I recall. And I wasn't aware that it was an eagle feather. But I want to thank you so much for telling, sharing your story of what was going through your mind and your emotions during that day, and the 15 minutes prior to that, something that we don't know, the audience doesn't know, and what was going through your mind, and especially with the questions from the reporters. So I really wanted to just say thank you so much for sharing that piece of history that wasn't shared with the public that watched that day. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Yeah, I just you know, the work that I've always done, like I said, I just do it because I'm told to do it. So I really didn't realize, actually, even the numbers of people that would be watching, or that it was, you know, it didn't even go through my mind at all. You know, I just had to do my task and do what I needed to do and say. And I remember getting, you know, I received lots of messages after from people around the world, actually. And one of them that I remember, and realizing that I hadn't even thought about how huge this was getting pictures back of in community from different communities from across the country that were watching. So they sent me pictures of the screens of, you know, the people, the crowds, the survivors, that were listening, and it was just amazing afterwards. And you know, and thinking about the powerful, it was empowering for everyone, but at the same time, you know, so emotional. And but just to get that kind of feedback was very powerful. I just noticed, I'm looking at the messaging too. There is a question about why I said reconciliation is worse. I don't think I said the reconciliation issue is worse. What I'm saying is that the responses or the lack of government taking responsibility for any of this, the issues of MMIW, finding our babies buried in the schools, the unmarked graves, the mass graves, is what I'm saying. The numbers of not only missing and murdered Indigenous women, but men, children, today is worse. And I think maybe social media helps to identify these things more than ever. Maybe that's why it seems worse, but I think it's happening. When I'm saying things are worse, is the response from government is that they have done nothing. So that's what I'm saying is it's worse now than ever. So even if you look at the numbers of Indigenous women who are in federal prisons, is at 50%. So that's now worse than ever. So that's what I'm saying, that the government's responsibility and taking action is worse now than ever.
Thank you, Beverly. We have another question in the chat by Irene. Irene writes, I don't think that anything could compensate damages and loss Indigenous peoples had to go through. However, what do you think the Canadian government could do now for Indigenous peoples, at least to give them the opportunity to move forward? And also, what do you have in your dream for your own community?
Those are good questions. Well, government can acknowledge that they committed genocide. That's the first thing that they need to do. And so in their admission of, they need to stop fighting lawsuits. So they're putting millions and millions of dollars into fighting, paying the lawyers to fight what's happening in court. They need to put the resources in community. So the millions and millions of dollars that they're putting into the courts should be sent to Indigenous communities for water, for housing, for education, for the development of our own immersion language programs, for child protection. You know, I mean, that's a prime example of what they're fighting is the child protection issues. And there's even decisions that are made where they have to provide the resources in community. They're not doing it. So that's what they need to do, is to actually provide those resources. And I think I had actually just did an interview this week in responding to the monarchy, the Queen Elizabeth's Jubilee, so 70-year reign. So I said, okay, Queen Elizabeth, you've done this harm to our community as a result of your laws. Again, it's Canada and Britain that need to take responsibility for what they've done. And so, you know, I'm thinking as an abuser, as someone who's been in an abusive relationship, what would I ask of my abuser? I would ask them to take responsibility and ask them, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to repair the harm? I can tell you what I think, but what are you going to do? So I'm waiting for that answer. And what do I dream for my community? My dream is that we are living the way I had this dream one time of where our people were living on the land. We were in our cornfields. We were planting. Our kids were running around with no stress, with no. It was love. It was like this amazing, powerful ways of the way that we live, the way that we think, the way that we dream, the way that you know, we were taught about our ways of life, and that we have, and that we're living it with no stress, with no no feeling at all of the harms that occurred. That's my dream. My dream is that we're living that life as we always lived.
Thank you so much, Beverly. We have multiple other questions coming in. We have Liliana who writes in the chat, are you hopeful that the Pope will do something? He still did not admit that the Holy Church did anything.
Oh, that's a good question, because it's the same as the Harper's apology. The same as any apology. They need to admit what they've done, and they need to act. They need to respond to what they've done and put the resources into the harm that they've caused. It's about repairing the harm. That's it.
Thank you. We have another question by Satya in the chat. She writes, I'm admittedly at the beginning of my learning journey and commitment to action towards reconciliation. You spoke about the importance of allies and supporters. Do you feel that learning and awareness about First Nations, Inuit, and Métis history has increased over the years, perhaps especially after the discovery of unmarked graves across residential schools?
Yeah, I do get this question a lot about allies and supporters, and I think we've had that historical relationship since colonization. That's what the two-row wampum belt is about the support of our allies, that we're lived together in these lands, in our own path, and supporting each other. The learning and awareness about First Nations, Inuit, and Métis history, I think is not where it's at, but it has started. And I think that's part of that education. And, you know, my role even now with the university is indigenizing the university. And part of indigenizing the university is accept those within the institution, and knowing that it is a colonial institution, and that they know what decolonization means, that everybody has a responsibility as a teacher, as a staff person that's working within the institution, that they're willing to understand even what decolonization means. And you know, and with the discovery of the unmarked graves, this is what, 2012, 22, man. So it's like, it's 2022. Why did it have to take the discovery of unmarked graves for people's eyes to open? Because that's what it's taken. Because we've been saying this for hundreds of years. About what's happening and the impacts that's there. So, but you know, things I always, and I have been taught this, that things always happen for a reason, and that the situation that we're in has happened for a reason. And if everybody's finally, their light bulbs are coming on and people are becoming aware of their responsibility, and we continue down a really good path, really powerful, positive, healthy relationships, then we're leading onto that onto a really good path, onto a really healthy one, which is actually the message in my PhD dissertation, which came from this community of Akwesasne, of that healthy relationship that in everything, every living thing, every human creation, colonial, it's all coming back to this healthy relationship, because it's also that relationship that we have to the water and to the earth and everything that we need to shift things. And I think there's a shift happening, a good one.
Thank you so much for your answer, Beverly. We have another question that came in. I feel such a sense of hopelessness. Our governments can't commit the resources to solve the water issues or the displaced Indigenous peoples who were forced off their traditional lands and moved to floodplains. They fight lawsuits in court. Where is the hope for a healthy relationship?
Well, I think who puts government in place? Who elects them? Who puts the messaging out there? It isn't just those who are taking on the political leadership. It's those who are putting them in place. So, like I said, it's everybody's responsibility. So, if you are a voter and you're putting these people in those positions of power, then that's the questions that you need to ask them. What are they going to do? I always have hope. One of the things is I've never given up hope. We can't give up hope for our kids and our grandkids and for anything. We have to continue to have hope.
Thank you. We have a bit more time for a few other questions. If anybody else wants to add anything in the chat, we'll give you some time.
I noticed a question by David about why is bullshit a problem? That's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that one, but it's a good one to solve.
Yeah, David, if you want to clarify, feel free to write in the chat a little bit, and we can expand on that. All right. Well, if no one else has any questions, we can end the presentation here. I think, Carmen, do you want to say something?
Absolutely. Thank you, Antoine. Dr. Jacobs, Beverley, thank you so much. It's really been an honor, and I'm so grateful, and we are grateful that you accepted the invitation to come today and opening up our presenters series and first day of National Indigenous History Month. I also want to thank our guests. Thank you so much for joining us today. Often I get the question as, what can we do? What can I do to respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And what can I do for reconciliation? Well, attending presentations like this is definitely taking a step. Being aware, learning. The more we are knowledgeable, the more that we can take action and make tiny little changes. And get closer to reconciliation. So I want to thank each and every one of the guests for joining us today. I'll give the last word to George.
Yes, Yoko, for your presentation, and it hit so many personal connections for myself. Indian day school survivor myself. And my father went to Mount Elgin. He was a champion runner back in the day, and he actually went on to education as a carpenter in Toronto. So I guess there were many horrors that did occur, within the schools, and even within my own home nation of Oneida Nation of the Thames as well. Onyataaga, Niwa Gahalodo, Niwa Gahonjoda. But anyways, it's I didn't introduce myself in the language, even though I have that ability, because I just try to translate it as I go. But really quickly, not to take up too much of your time again, is that what I was getting at is that I had no idea until things were uncovered. The young people were uncovered, where I learned a lot more about my own family history with residential school, and that a lot of my relatives went to the mush hole too. That was within I guess whatever lands were remaining of Schweigen, but also the Oneidas were sent as far away as Brennan, Manitoba, which is something in my own findings about the family history that I have within residential schools. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of research, and you mentioned about years ahead, to be found out about our lost loved ones, our older ones that didn't make their way home. But anyways, that's I just wanted to share that on a personal note, because it is very personal, as a indigenous, well, as a Ongwe, of this continent, and it's something that we have to learn from, and to accept that help when it's offered in allyships and partnership building going forward. So I just wanted to say, Dr. Jacobs, as you're professionally known as, but but I'd rather say your Ongwe name. but I'll see you again in the future for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Ona Nawa.
Ona, yo.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice day.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.